Hello friends, now we are going to study of friendship. Perhaps it must be the longest essay of Bacon. He has written 8 stanza, so I have divided this 8 stanza into 2 parts. First 4 stanzas as part 1 and next 4 stanzas part 2, and he has described about 3 fruits of friendship in this essay. Okay, let's be into the first part of this essay of friendship. When I start reading this essay, it has too many mythological references and classical references, so I advise you to study stanza wise, so it will be helpful and take some time to understand everything. As I have already told, I take this essay from Narayan series. At the back of every essays, they have given some explanatory notes, which is very useful for me to understand this classical references. Of friendship that exceeds more than in any relation. It had been hard for him that spake it to have put more truth and untruth together in few words than in that speech. Whosoever is delighted in solitude is either a wild beast or a god. Bacon introduces Aristotle's quotes in this beginning of the essay. Whoever is delighted in solitude is either a wild beast or a god. Bacon says that it is hard for Aristotle to speak the mixture of both the truth and untruthful words. He differentiates the truth and the untruth out of this phrase. For it is more true that a natural and secret hatred and aversion towards society in a man had somewhat of the savage beast. But it is most untrue that it should have any character at all of the divine nature, except it proceed not out of a pleasure in solitude, but out of a love and a desire to bestir a man's self for a higher conversation. Bacon differentiate both the truth and untruth. Truth, a man who has hatred towards society will make him as a wild beast. And the untruth, there is no divine character exists in human, no longer he practices towards it, not in the way of finding pleasure alone, but in the way out of love and desire by neglecting his self-satisfaction. Such as is found to have been falsely and finely in some of the heathens, as Epimendes the Canadian, Numa the Roman, Empedocles the Sicilian, and Apollonius of Tyana, and truly and really in divers of the ancient hermits and holy fathers of this church. But little do men perceive what solitude is and how far it extends. For a crowd is not company, and faces are but a gallery of pictures, and talk but a tingling symbol where there is no love. Bacon lists out some non-Christians, which means heathens characters, who have perspected this phrase wrongly. First one, Epimendes the Canadian. He is a poet of Crete and soothsayer, asleep for 57 years as a boy in the cave. And next, Numa the Roman. Numa Pompilius tried to learn religious wisdom from a nymph Egeria. The third one, Empedocles the Sicilian, a philosopher and a poet who throws himself in a fire flames believed to be a god. Next, Apollonius of Tyana, Pythagoras philosopher who possessed to have miraculous power. They are ancient hermits away from Christianity. The extension of solitude realize a man about the real solitude. And gathering as a crowd with a tinkling cymbal without love, it's not a divinity. The Latin adage meeteth with it a little, Magnus civitas monga solitude. A great city is a great solitude, because in a great town friends are scattered. So there is not the fellowship for the most part, which is in less neighborhoods. But we may go further and affirm most truly that it is a mere and miserable solitude to want true friends, without which the world is but a wilderness. and even in the sense also of solitude, whosoever in the frame of his nature and affections is unfit for friendship, he taketh it of the beast and not from humanity. He adds a Latin proverb which admits solitude, Magnus civitas monga solitude, which means a great city is a great solitude. Bacon gives reasons for this Latin proverb. First one, in a great city, friends are scattered, which lacks fellowship and a neighborhood. In order to get rid of this solitude, one should go out and meet his friends because solitude will make the man wilder. He says that those who lack the capacity to get fitter into a friendship has been considered as a beast rather than a human. Second paragraph. A principal fruit of friendship is the case and the discharge of the fullness and the swelling of the heart, which passions of all kinds do ease and induce. We know diseases of stoppings and suffocation are most dangerous in the body, and it is not much otherwise in the mind. You may take sarsa to open the liver, steel to open the spleen, flower of sulphur for the lungs, castoreum for the brain, but no recipe open the heart but a true friend, to whom you may impart griefs, joys, fears, hopes, suspicions, counsel, and whatsoever lieth upon the heart to oppress it, in a kind of civil shrift of confession. In this paragraph, Bacon explains about the speciality of friendship compared with the physical speciality. First one, the primary motto of friendship is to understand the feelings which makes the heart swell. It is very dangerous when the body doesn't exhibit natural discharges from our body, but it is less compared to the mental discharge without exhibiting the feelings. Bacon lists out some medical prescription to cure the physical illness. First one, for liver, sarsa, which is called as sarsaparilla, and beverage treats liver, anti-cancer, antimicrobial conditions. And steel, which is used to cure spleen through surgery. And for lungs, flower of sulphur, which cures lung diseases. Castoreum, extracted from castor, used for brain. Above things can improve physical health, but nothing can be found to cure heart. There is no recipe has been found to cure the mental disease, but a true friend can cure. A true friend with whom we can share the feelings of joy, fear, hope, suspicion, counseling, and whatsoever stresses our mind, which oppress our mind. It is merely like a confession to a priest in churches. It is a strange thing to observe how high a rate great kings and monarchs do set upon this fruit of friendship whereof we speak, so great as they purchase it many times at the hazards of their own safety and greatness. For princes, in the record of the distance of their fortune from that of their subjects and servants, cannot gather his fruit, except to make themselves capable thereof. They raise some person to be, as it were, companions and almost equals to themselves, which many times sorteth to inconvenience. The modern language give unto such persons to name of favorites or privados, as if it were matters of grace or conversation. But the Roman name attained the true use and the cause thereof, naming them participes curarum, share of their cares, for it is that which tieth the knot, and we see plainly that his hath been done, not by weak and passionate prince only, but by the wisest and most politic that ever reigned, who have ofttimes joined themselves some of their servants, whom both themselves have called friends, and allow others likewise to call them in the same manner, using a word which is received between private men. In this paragraph, Bacon briefs his wishes for a highest rate, which means king, having friendship with the commoners. He has given some 6 points. First one, Bacon says it must be strange when the kings and monarchs dwell in kind of friendship, like he said. They can save themselves with safety and greatness. A prince can, underneath his level, from higher subject and to be friend with the common people and treat them equally. In modern terms, they can be called as favorite people or privados. Privados in Spanish, intimate friend, with whom the king can share the anxieties. Roman follows this in the name of participes curarum, shares of their secret. It is not the king or weak, but they are wise and more politic. The king can join with some of his friends even though they are servants, and they can call them with some kind of nicknames in private, a word between private men. El Sulla, when he commanded Rome, raised Pompey, after Surname the Great, to the height that Pompey wanted himself for Sulla's overmatch. For when he had carried the consulship for a friend of his against the pursuit of Sulla, and that Sulla did a little reason threat and began to speak great, Pompey turned upon him again and in effect bade him to be quiet, for that more men adore the sun rising than sun setting. Bacon lists out the friendship between the kings and nobles. First one, Sulla and Pompey. Sulla raised the level of Pompey when he was general of Rome, but Pompey tried to overmatch him. He holded his hand with Lepidus and tricked him to resent his position in a phrase, for that men adored sun rising. He compared himself with the sunrise, then sun setting. He compared the sunset with the Sulla. With Julius Caesar, Decimus Brutus has obtained the interest, as he set him down in the testament for heir in remainder after his nephew, and this was a man that had power with him to draw him forth to his death. For when Caesar would have discharged the Senate in regard of some ill presages, and especially a dream of Calpurnia, this man lifted him gently by the arms out of his chair, telling him he hoped he would not dismiss the Senate till his wife had a better dream. Julius Caesar and Decimus Brutus. Decimus Brutus hold-handed with the Marcus Brutus and killed him after Senate meeting, which comes in his wife Calpurnia's dreams. Calpurnia is the wife of Caesar. And it seemed his favor was so great as Antonius, in a letter which he recited verbatim in one of Cicero's Philippics, called him Benefica, which as if he had enchanted Caesar. Antonius and Augustus. They shared their empire, but Antony spoiled with Cleopatra. He received a letter from Cicero Philippics, a Roman orator, called him Benefica, which raised Agrippa, though of mean birth, to that height, as he consulted with Maecenas about the marriage of his daughter Julia. Maecenas took the liberty to tell him that he must either marry his daughter to Agrippa or take away his life. There was no third way, he had made him so great. Augustus raised Agrippa in a position of a general, as he belonged to royal birth, and he wanted to Maecenas to suggest the ideas of his own daughter's marriage, but Maecenas explained it by saying that he should marry a daughter to Agrippa or take away his own life, because there is nothing left to make him higher place. With Tiberius Caesar, Sejanus has ascended to that height, as they were termed and reckoned as a pair of friends. Tiberius in a letter to him said, Hoec pro amicitia nostra non occultavi. In consideration of our friendship, I have not hidden these things from you, as the whole Senate dedicated an altar to friendship as to a goddess in respect, the great dearness of friendship between them two. Tiberius and Sejanus, they both were friends. Caesar raised to Sejanus as a god. He plotted against his own friend and executed in Senate altar dedicated to praise their friendship. The like or more was between Septimus Severus and Platinius, for he forced his elder son to marry the daughter of Platinius, and would often maintain Platinius in doing afference to his son, and did write also in a letter to the Senate by these words, I love them so well, as I wish he may ever live me. Septimus Severus forced his elder son to marry the daughter of Platinius, so that he would not harm his son. Now, if this princess had been as a Trojan or a Marcus Aurelius, a man might have thought that this had proceeded of an abundant goodness of nature, but being men so wise of such strength and suavity of mind, and so extreme lovers of themselves, as all these were, if proved most plainly that they found their own felicity, though as great as ever happened to mortal man, but as an half piece, except they ought to have a friend to make it entire, and yet, which is more, they were princes that had wives, sons, nephew, and yet all this could not supply the comfort of friendship. Bacon gives two kinds of good matured people, Trajan and he is emperor of Rome, and Marcus Aurelius, he is also emperor of Rome. Bacon says that even though above listed personality had wives, sons, nephews, still they lacked the comfort of a real friendship.